Hi everyone, it's me, Arden Lee, and today's video topic is a question that comes from one of our members of the Repatterning Parlor who asks, how do you find a balance between staying informed about what's going on in the world and the news and all the global crises that we are facing on a daily basis and not giving your power over to it, not being consumed by it? How do you balance awareness and being informed with your self-care and your practice of aligning with your highest good and aligning with the highest good of all? This is a great question. The energetics behind this question are essentially why I created the Repatterning Project. I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of tragedy going on in the world. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of tension as the polarities of the ways of being, one being fear, anger, greed, jealousy. All of those are rooted in fear, by the way. And the other being love, compassion, oneness, unity. As these poles are moving away from one another, there's a lot that's being brought up. There's a lot of friendships that have been destroyed in the past 3 years, shall we say. There's a lot of people that we got to know their true nature when we got to see it finally being tested, being called into question. It was a pretty wild time for everyone, I would say. But here's what I want to say about this. We can't fix the world by ourselves, obviously. We can fix it as a collective. So our job is really to find out, what is our role? What is our role in all of this? What are our unique strengths? What are our gifts? What are the ways that we are best suited to help align the global consciousness with the kind of love and unity and compassion that's going to help us survive as a species? It's a lot of information to cram into a short video, you guys, but essentially, if you didn't already notice, the old way of doing things that is rooted in fear is not going to work if we're going to survive, right? If we have a planet of just a few billionaires, but everyone else is dying, even those billionaires after a while are going to realize that they can't live on a planet by themselves, right? We need everyone to make the system functional. And if we head down that timeline, we're essentially looking at an apocalypse with a very dwindling species if we don't do our part to solve the climate crisis. We don't do our part to balance the economy so that everyone can live and sustain themselves, right? All of these things that we're looking at, moving from an old paradigm where the success of the individual was prized at the expense of the impact to the collective, right? Meaning a few succeed and a lot of people fail, into how do we create an ecosystem with a closed loop, right? We're moving from exponentialism, which is like humanity being a virus taking over the planet, right? And consuming resources and accumulating waste. How do we change that into a closed system, which is what Daniel Schmachtenberger compares it to a forest, right? There is no waste in a forest. It is a closed loop, right? It is a system that self-sustains. He refers to this concept as omni consideration. How do we move into a paradigm of omni consideration, one where everyone benefits? That's really what we're looking at when we're looking at the news, right? Anything that's happening today on the front of a global crisis can fit into old paradigm consciousness is no longer going to work for us, and the need to shift into a new paradigm consciousness which takes the full collective into account and creates sustainability on the planet. So your job is to find out what your role in this is. And when you find your role in that, then it becomes a lot easier to sleep at night. There's a lot going around the internet right now about how we are on the cusp of World War III with the actions of some of our American leaders. And naturally, I'm concerned. Naturally, I don't want there to be loss of life. Naturally, I don't want the suffering that would occur. But I also realize my powerlessness to do anything about being on the cusp of World War III. What I recognized within the last few years for myself is that my gift, my job in this ascension is to help others, individuals, create sustainability within their own bodies, within their own ecosystems of the individual, right? What do I mean by that? Well, if we're walking around and we have all this trauma that's built up and we're walking around in survival mode with all this unprocessed grief and this suffering and all this harm that has been done to us, either the abuse we grew up with, the societal programming we grew up with, the formative relationships, etc., everything that the repatterning project addresses, all the things that create our beliefs, that create those imprints, all those things that cause us to live in the stress hormone environment of survival mode, continually thinking that the harm of our past is happening over and over and over because it's what we become used to, and therefore unconsciously recreating it by expecting the same thing to happen over and over and over again, and or not drawing boundaries against things when they happen over and over and over again because we feel that that's about as good as it can get, because that's all we know, that's all we're familiar with. What I help people with is I help create that sustainability where all of that old grief, all of that old pain and suffering can be processed and understood and released, and so that we can create the space to create something new. That goes for economically as well, right? We're also living in late capitalism. I can't purport to solve late capitalism, unfortunately. If I could, I would definitely be doing it right now. But what I can help people do is I can help them to create the space emotionally that is needed to tap into their gifts and their passions and the things that they are truly meant to bring forth into the world, and help them to do that in a way that also sustains them in return. So once we clear out the trauma of our past, we have the space to say, okay, well, if I'm done with that, what do I want to create now? What do the friendships I want to create look like? What do, what is the work that I want to do in the world look like? How can I bring more joy to this planet? How can I bring more joy to myself? What are my relationships going to look like from here on out? How can I create from that spectrum of infinite possibility? And when they're at that place, when we release the grief and the trauma of the past, and we are no longer living with a whole bunch of stress hormones from our thoughts and emotions that are coming up, it's really just stuck trauma. There's this great thing that David Hrostowski, who is the author of the Ascension Manual for Planet Earth, says in that book. What he says is, with peace comes bandwidth. And what that means is that when we've achieved that state of inner peace, we free up so much of our creative power to start creating our lives from scratch, and to tap into what our mission is. We have that bandwidth to say, oh wow, I have the rest of my life in front of me now. I'm no longer running on that same hamster wheel that I was, giving my energy to all of these programs that actually weren't working for me, looking for approval, right? Replaying dynamics that I played out with my parents when I was a kid, right? Hoping that if I'm just good enough or worthy enough that everyone's going to love me, right? Spending all my money on expensive shoes so that, people won't fuck with me or whatever it is, all the stuff that I did when I was being unconscious too. When we clear out all the energy from those programs that don't work for us, that were installed by faulty belief systems that happened during, early trauma imprints, sometimes later trauma imprints, but often we're looking at the root, we're looking at the, the early stages of life when the patterns really get set. Once we've cleared all of that, we have this space. We say, wow, well, what do I want to do now? And also look at the world around me. How can I be helpful? What can I do for other people, right? How can I best bring my gifts to the forefront? So because I help people do this, I sleep well at night. Well, except when I'm getting a gazillion downloads and spirits talking to me, and then I'm up for 48 hours. But what I mean is, I understand that I'm controlling my part of the equation. I'm doing my best for the work that I've been tasked with. I'm helping people clear their old patterns. That's my job. That's my job, and that's my role in this ascension. So, I might see the news, and I might feel, wow, that's a shame, and I might feel fear. I might worry about what's going to happen. But if I get to that point where that fear is contracting me so much that I can't show up and do my part, then it's not being helpful. There's nothing that my worrying about World War III is going to do. Now, is there action that I can take? I'm sure that there are, representatives I could call about that. Probably I have a feeling most of the representatives are in agreement on this one. The ones who aren't, I'm not going to change their minds probably. But with other issues in the past, yeah, absolutely. I've phoned my representatives, I've gone and done the resist bot, and texted where I need to text to make sure that my voice is heard. Beyond that, what am I going to do? I'm going to vote, naturally, I'm going to vote for the candidate that I think is most in line with the goal of sustainability, right? The goal of omni consideration. But other than that, any worrying or any drawing myself into that fear of what might happen, of what is currently happening, any of it that takes away from my own work is not serving me, and it's not helping me serve others. So the important part is, are we aware of where that line is? Because ultimately, the people who are really helping this ascension are those who are out there in their field doing their own specialized work to help shift the collective consciousness toward omni consideration. And there's a million ways you could do that. You can be an environmentalist who specializes in marine biology, and maybe what you're doing is figuring out a way to clean up the Great Pacific garbage dump, right? You can be like me and you can work with people at the level of the individual. You could be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and you could be doing that work on the government level, right? You could be campaigning for a government official that you believe in. You could be a medical doctor helping people restore their physical wellness, but doing it with such kindness and compassion, that you're really listening to them and you're really helping them to get better, right? Not just prescribing them something and then calling it a day. Whatever you're doing, it's important to be doing it with the energy of love. I mean, honestly, you could be a cashier person at a grocery store and you could still be making people's lives better by the way that you treat them, right? There's so many ways that we can bring our gifts, bring our unique expression of love to the collective. So staying informed is important. But it's not helpful if it gets to the point where it's so overwhelming that it lowers your own vibration and your own capacity to show up and be loving while all of this is going on. I don't think a lot about the specifics. There might be people out there who would criticize me for that, but the things that are going on at the governmental level, there's not a lot that I can do about that. What I do think about in terms of specifics is I try to understand, to the best of my ability, the mechanics behind things like systemic injustice and systemic oppression, right? Because those are the things that are going to show up in my life, right? What are the ways that I'm unconsciously being a dumbass white person, right? What are the ways that I am, unconsciously perpetuating these systems? That's something that I can change. That's something I can fix in myself, right? What are the ways that I've internalized misogyny, right? How are my own internal beliefs and attitudes towards marginalized people, to trans folks? Have I dismantled, have I done my best to dismantle my inner colonizer? All of that. That's stuff that I can focus on. That's stuff that has a measurable result. The stuff that is going on that I don't really have a say over, I don't have a say over it. So, yeah, I check my news feeds, sure, I read about what's going on, and I try to consume things that don't sugarcoat the situation, but which come at it from a viewpoint of hope, right? 'Cause if we don't have hope, fuck, what do we have? But the reason that the news doesn't stress me out that much anymore is because I know I'm doing my part. I know I'm showing up every day and committing to my own soul mission. And the most important thing that I can do is work on cultivating that state of love and compassion and patience and kindness and open-heartedness and vulnerability so that it becomes second nature. There's this really interesting thing. I just finished this book, Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza, last night. So it's so interesting that this question is something that I have been called to address today. I want to read a little passage. If we can do it once, disturb those neural networks equated with anger, resentment, and retribution, and instead activate the neural networks related to experiences of caring, giving, and nurturing, and so create the corresponding emotions, then we should be able to do it again. And the repetition of these choices will neurochemically condition our mind and body to become one. Once enough of us can achieve this state of being, once everybody is locked into the same energy, frequency, and elevated consciousness, just like schools of fish or flocks of birds moving as one in a unified order, we'll begin to act as one mind and emerge as a new species. But if we continue to act as a cancerous organism at war with itself, our species will not survive, and evolution will continue its grand experiment. So that's our choice, right? Do we evolve or do we die out? And this is a critical juncture in history where we're looking at that. So what is our part in that? What is your part in that? What I help people do is I help people clear their past traumas and beliefs so they can find where that part is, so that they can cultivate that energy of love and compassion within themselves, release from all of the stress and survival mode of the past, and cultivate that place of compassion, that heart-centeredness that's for real, not just a bypass, not ignoring all the pain in the past, but transmuting it, right? Creating space, grieving it, releasing it, and creating space for a new way of being. And in that new way of being, there will be inspiration for how you can help others, because that space has been created. And because naturally, that would be the next thing that you think about, wouldn't it? Well, I got rid of all that. What do I do with the rest of my life? How do I help? So knowing that I do that is what helps me sleep at night despite the news. And when you find your own role and you know what you're bringing to the planet from that space of love and compassion and kindness, specializing in your unique genius, the skill sets that you were given in particular to help this planet into its ascension, then hopefully the news won't bother you as much either. Thank you, guys.